feel very nurtured and supported and happy, and thank you so much for coming. So, that was my small offering to Great Spirit. And I dug up... Sorry about that. So I dug up a little bit of poetry as a blessing to read to staff. Nature is the song and dance of God manifest. Our earth is love bound into matter. Beauty is our recognition of the reflection of the divine in creation. So this talk is about Attainable Utopias, growing resilient community. And it's growing resilient community in times of radical change. And I know that you'd have to be living under a rock to not know that there's some radical changes occurring right now, and in our personal lives, in our community, and of course on the whole planet. So I'd first like to thank the ancestors, the spirits of this land, the Daedic realm, the nature kingdoms, mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, animal kingdom, all of you here, and of course myself. So, what is utopia and how do I get there? Now, according to Wikipedia, utopia is an ideal society, but is this achievable in our present day? So tonight's talk will discuss some of the aspects of practical steps of achieving a utopia, and then after that you can make up your own mind. Like all paradise realms, it's truly born from perception, and just as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so is utopia in reach of the peaceful stillness. Of course, utopia is a state within, and it's not something to be reached for outside of ourselves. So in any vision quest, which this surely is, there's initial realization, which is possibly that there's a change to occur. And then the creation of a vision, which is a direction towards an ideal state, or what we think would be the best possible solution for that change. And of course, the path itself, which is what we actually do in order to achieve what we're trying to attain. And so our present moment is constructed from the past. It's learned from the past. It's dreamt for the future, and it's flowering now. So this is plotting a course of attainment. And I've lost my cursor. Okay. So when you're plotting a course of attainment, there's some big questions to ask. And one of the primary questions is, what do you want to grow? So most people know what they don't want. Fewer know what they truly want. And only a tiny minority can divine and navigate a clear path to it. Now this is basically where we're heading, if we don't. Okay, so designing a vision. pertinent question that Bill McDonough asks is, how do we love all of the children of all species for all time? And this has become a design maxim. And so what I've explored is how we can plant the dream seeds, pull out our belief weeds, and harvest the fruit of love. So I feel that living systems that humans create are best designed of nature. And that's, of course, because nature is already divinity manifest in physical form. So it seems only right that we should copy. The essence of nature is balance. And of course, when you have a lot of things moving into balance, we call that harmony. And as many a spiritual and mystical text has quoted, as above, so below. And it's obvious that in living systems, the micro and macro mirror each other. And so what I'm going to start off with tonight is assessing a picture of our community. And in most cases, I'll be referring to the personal community of living organisms within the body as well, your micro and flora and fauna in your gut, as well as the bigger systems, the living systems of the planet. Okay, so initially, we have to assess what we have. The present is moulded from a combination of past experience and future dreams. And so, as we start to assess what it is we have, we will look at a design principle called harmonic design, which takes into a number of different aspects. This harmonic design is based on bionic principles. Bionic just means copied from nature, and biomimicry is nature copied. So what are some of the qualities of a natural system? It's highly adaptable. Form follows function. In other words, the physical form is a manifestation of what it's designed to do. An interesting example of that would be a wine dancer that has a candle on their hand. When they hold the candle upright and they move it in that arc, you get a golden mean spiral. There's an exact representation or harmonic between that phalange and that one and that one, that one and that one, that one and that one. And so the body is built to a type of sacred geometrical matrix. Nature is abundant and resilient. And so the idea of sustainable starts to sound a little bit stale. So today we often hear people talking about a sustainable environment. Imagine if I described my relationship with someone as sustainable. You know, let's say I say, oh yeah, my wife, I have a sustainable relationship. You know, it's not very exciting. Nature is way more than sustainable. Nature is over unity, it's abundant, it's constantly supplying way more than we need. And so if we design a system that runs like a natural system, there will be plenty for all. And this is basically the seed that I'm looking at. Of course, interdependent biodiversity. And so some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight, especially amongst individuals, is dependence and codependence, and how that leads to basically conflict instead of cooperation. So these are some of the things that nature is, and we're going to strive to move towards. So of course, communities that are designed on natural principles are designed to thrive in sudden changes. So the first thing we have to do is identify the local sources of bioenergy in nature, and we have to nurture them. Now I've put here a sense of place because of course this is going to be different in each locale. If we were in British Columbia, it would be looking at salmon, fir trees, bears, river systems. and watching how the bioenergetic trails of salmon, how they move out into the sea, eat small fish, swim up and spawn in the rivers, and how all that energy is flushed into the ecosystem as bears catch those salmon, and the nutrient chain is cyclical. For example, in Byron Bay, when people, Europeans first came to this area, because they were a survival culture, all they saw were things to take. There was a big rainforest, so we had timber getters, we had whaling, we had all things which were depleting the soil, and it was a survival culture that wasn't giving much back to the soil. And so Bill McDonough looked at a series of principles called the Hanover Principles. And the Hanover Principles, the first one is insist on the rights of humanity and nature to coexist. These are pretty self-explanatory. The next one is recognize interdependence. Recognize the connectivity of everything. We are all connected in way deeper ways than we may be consciously aware of. So the third principle is respect relationship between spirit and matter. Accept responsibility for the consequences of design. And of course, design here is referring to, this is the first human intention. Once we see something that has to be done, then we approach the realm of design. We need to create safe objects of long-term value and not tyrannize the future. So if we're building a house, we want to build a house that's not only going to last because it's a good source of use of resource, that it's something that's going to last. And I'm sure everyone's aware of, how we've gone into a culture of taking cheap Chinese produce and where that leads. Eliminate the concept of waste. Make sure that everything that's being used is returned into a clean cycle. Rely on natural energy flows. Do not mortgage the past or the future. So if we recognize our solar energy is driving a lot of our living systems, then we don't need to bypass those living systems and go to other systems which create dependence. Of course, we have to understand the limitations of the design. And lastly, I think, is be humble, seek constant improvement by the sharing of knowledge. Now, Bill McDonough had a very interesting concept for design which balanced equity, ecology, and economy. And I'll run through a couple of the questions. For example, that triangle over there is an economy question. And it would be something like, can I make it and sell it for a profit? That one there would be moving towards equity. Equity being socialism or communism, and that being pure capitalism. Along this line, most of our world has been driven. And so an economy equity question would be, are our employees earning a living wage? An equity economy question, which would be there, would be something like, are men and women paid the same for their work? So this is an interesting design model, and it encompasses, of course, ecology, which has been left out in most ways in which we deal with economics. So when a country is assessing whether it's possible to build a dam, for example, they're not necessarily taking a true ecological look at the possible consequences of what they're doing. And for anyone who's interested, as this talk is going to be a fair amount of time, I'm going to skip this design process and go to some more exciting things. So, We want to use our current solar income. These are design maxims. And we want to respect diversity. And I think you read the first one. Okay, so the design criteria are cost, performance, aesthetics, ecological intelligence, fairness, and fun. And we want to be able to celebrate abundance and not bemoan the limits. So we want to be eco-effective and not eco-efficient. We want to turn our guns into plowshares, which is survival. But then we also want to make musical instruments, because we're now talking about beyond survival. We're moving out of a Darwinian idea of survival of the fittest to survival of the fittest being survival of the most loving. So what is a resilient community? So these are some of the characteristics of a resilient community. They have a shared vision. They are biodiverse. They have a strong local economy. They're interdependent, which means they are independent and then choosing to share. They have a balance of resource. Of course, they nurture self-love, and in this case, self would be the community itself, and they're modeled on natural principles. So what does a healthy community grow from other than seeds, vision seeds? So what we need to plant those seeds in are healthy soil, and of course with healthy soil we can grow healthy food, and with healthy food we grow healthy cells, and healthy cells, healthy body, mind and spirit leads to healthy community. Now that's a pretty simple, basic extrapolation of material energy. So what is a healthy soil? Some of the characteristics of healthy soil is it's aerobic. In other words, it breathes air. It tends towards alkalinity. Now these are the same things that the human body requires for health. They require a balanced micro ecosystem, which is bacteria, microbes, fungi, microflora and fauna. Now your body is probably a whole zoo of living organisms. And if you were to take on a regular basis antibiotics, you'd probably die. So most people know if they have a strong course of antibiotics, they'll take some acidophilus or something to start boosting their microflora and fauna. But depending on the health of your system will depend on how resilient you are. So if you were to take antibiotics, you'd be wiping out, let's say, your whole climax ecosystem in your stomach, and let's compare that to a rainforest. When you first start growing a new ecosystem after bulldozing it, the first plants that would arrive would be opportunistic plants like weeds. And they're basically very susceptible to big shifts. If there's a big shift, they would die, and the next level would come along, and a bulldozed rainforest may take quite a while to start regenerating. But if you've got something that's really buffered, like a rainforest, and you take out one tree, it will recover extremely fast. And so what I'm suggesting here is that systems that are decaying, dying, dependent, depressed or stagnating are susceptible to disease and attack by pests and predators, and they use up a lot of energy in conflict. And so we're going to move away from those, and we're going to follow some bioenergy trails. Now, a bioenergy trail is a way of looking at the environment and seeing where our energy comes from. Bill Mollison once gave an example of how rainforests in Brazil are being cut down, the small amount of nutrient burnt to ash, grown a quick crop of grass, so that cattle can be grown. 70% of that actual cow ends up as dog food to end up on the streets as dog shit in a city like Paris. Now that's not a very good use of bioenergy of a climax ecosystem that's been evolving over hundreds, if not thousands of years. So Bill McDonough actually wrote a book called Cradle to Cradle, where he talks about the cycling of energy instead of cradle to grave. If we can design systems that are cradle to cradle, where the energy recycles and constantly rejuvenates the system from where it comes. We'll have systems that are constantly growing, where there's always more for everybody in the system, and that's including humans, community, ecology, and we'll see an economy. So, how do we increase resilience in the community? We grow a robust local economy. We source food, power, water, and building materials locally. We reduce vulnerability to fluctuating food and oil prices. All solutions are local. So then we get to see how the power of our dollar, where we spend it, and what we do with it affects our world. And I'll run a quick scenario with you. In our community we have, for example, a Santos and a Woolworths, and I often hear people say, well, I don't like to shop at Santos because it's too expensive. Expensive seems to relate to value for money, but it's very difficult for us to see the value for money when we compare it to someone like Woolworths. So Woolworths are sourcing their food from far and wide, most often under something like slave labour. There is a poisoned earth to create crops at that price. There would be pesticides and herbicides used, fertilizers. It creates poverty, slavery, food crisis, and of course food riots, which is what we're witnessing today. Deforestation, loss of topsoil, and species extinction are just a few. And so when you start to add all of those costs, including your health, then you see that actually shopping at a place like Santos is actually really good value for money. And shopping at a place like Woolworths, although it seems cheap in the short term, is long-term blindness and is creating a world devastation. Now, I'm not trying to focus on Woolworths. I'm trying to focus on the practice of homogeneity and monoculture and sourcing massive amounts of bioenergy for nothing. So, practical ways to invest energy in your community. On the bottom it says, think local, you're already global. So, the things for our community, for example, could be farmers market, which we have. We've got some new ones in Mullumbimby, the more the merrier. Events and festivals to showcase local creativity and art. We need local government to invest more energy in supporting local artists and local gardeners, alternative healers, because with that support, then those people will end up being able to afford to live in our community, because at the moment, those people are being marginalised, and the very essence of what brought us here as a community is starting to fall apart. So a community credit union to manage our commonwealth. We need to nurture our natural resources. That can be anything from ecotourism and whale watching to beaches to Aboriginal wisdom. Everything that makes this place unique and special. Of course, we value add. So instead of selling our forests wholesale, if we cut down a tree, we make use of every little bit. We build furniture. We make it. We honour it. Some other ways would be small and effective self-governing. Now, local council is even local council is starting to become too big, tied up in red tape. Anyone who's had dealings with council will realise that a bureaucracy ultimately becomes a behemoth and commits suicide. So we need to keep it small and versatile. We need to make sure our food has low food miles. We need to invest energy in growing food locally, more food locally. We need to treat our own waste and recycle. Investment in local human resource and employment, localised alternative power generation, healthy water security, reduced dependence on oil, local food production and sovereignty. And of course, the reduced dependence on oil is now very obvious because, as we can see, there's worldwide riots going on right now because of the price of oil, which is directly related to the access to food. When we're getting butter from New Zealand being shipped to London, And of course, Danish butter being shipped to here, and you think of how much diesel it would take to move these things around, and being balanced by subsidies worldwide, we realize we're running into a problem. And of course now oil will bring that to the fore. So local food production and sovereignty, beautify, beautify, beautify. Okay. So localized means incorporate culture into architecture and landscape, diversify. We need to diversify incomes, habitat, microclimates and food sources. We need to honour our ecology, honour our elders and the elders' wisdom. We need to honour our children. We need to increase wildlife habitats by linking them to more of themselves. We need to nurture diversity in ecology, community and economy. And all of these buffer against rapid change, which I'm going to talk about soon. So community and gardens and allotments are one of the responses, something that's happening in Mullum at the moment, and I urge anyone who either doesn't have a green finger or who does to get involved. And I hope the gardens here will soon be a home to a community garden and an allotment as well. So a buffered ecosystem favours biodiversity, whereas vulnerability exposes us to the mercy of the corporatocracy. Now what that means is, for people who are living in the area, they know that living near the ocean, here in Byron Bay, the temperature is milder than in Mullumbimby, for example, because you're near the ocean and the ocean acts as a giant heat sink. And so what happens is, when it's hot, it's a little bit cooler than Mullumbimby or Lismore. And when it's cool, it's a little bit warmer. And so what that does, that teeny little bit of temperature buffering, creates less swings, and the less swings further favour more specialisation and more biodiversity. Bigger swings make it very difficult for plants and animals to exist, and only the toughest will survive. And so what we're aiming to do is create systems that are actually biodiverse so that they're buffered. Now if you go up again into Upper Wilson's Creek, for example, because of the forest acts like a giant heat sink through its trees, we have the same situation. When it's really cold, it's a couple of degrees warmer, and when it's really hot, it's a couple of degrees cooler. So the contrast would be a desert where you have these massive temperature swings. Daytime can be really hot, nighttime really cold, and it's very difficult to survive. And because the human is a homeostatic being and is regulating its own temperature, the higher the swings, the more energy we use to ride those swings and roller coasters. And so when we apply that to a community and building a resilient community, what we're trying to do is to create less swings. Now, what's coming over the horizon is large swings in the economy, large swings in global climate change, large swings in personal psychology as we go through a massive change, which I'm going to talk about soon. Okay, so to create a network for this resilience, we need to make biotrails transparent via information networks. So like the trails I was talking about then of where energy comes from and where energy goes to needs to be made clear. If you go to a farmer's market, you want to know how that food was grown, whether pesticides or fertilizers were used. And so if you can speak to the farmer directly, you can say, do you use pesticides, and choose not to buy. So we need to make the trails of where things come from and where they go to transparent. We need to cross-link grassroots movements to create a holistic vision. So there are many movements at the moment. It can be anything from Save the Forest or Plant a Garden or alternative healing. We need to create, maybe through web links and a web culture, of course this is already happening, a grassroots movement which links these into the largest movement of people in living history. And that's a reference to Pioneer Conference, how this movement encompasses more people at one time than ever in our recorded history. We need to build networks to pool resources, share information and abundance. Local ownership. This is local shops, local farms, anchors wealth in the community. And when we shop locally, that spreads the wealth into the community, and that acts as a multiplier. So if you have a choice to pay a couple of dollars cheaper at a store that's owned by someone from outside of the community and pay more for the same item at a store owned by someone inside the community, you don't actually realize that you're actually driving and saving energy in the community, and it's actually costing you and the whole community less. Okay, so what is the marketplace? Marketplace isn't just where we buy and sell things. It's where we meet. And from the true definition, we're all selling things all the time to each other. We're selling ideas. We're selling beliefs of who we are, where we're going, what we feel is right. There was a lady who came through here last week. Her name was Judy Wicks, and she spoke in Mullumbimby as well as a conference in Brisbane. And she started a movement in America that's taking America by storm. And it's about creating a local living economy. Now what that means is businesses have a quadruple bottom line. It means it has to be, in order for them to make decisions, it has to be good for the economy, it has to be good for the ecology, it has to be good for a community, and it has to be good for individuals. And if it isn't, then it doesn't make the grade. We have to pay people a living wage, not a minimum wage. If everyone pays everyone who's working with them or for them a living wage means that with that money they can afford to live in the community in which they exist in. And I've heard a lot of people in Byron Bay talking about the amount of money they can earn here compared to the cost of living. And so we're sliding into a type of poverty, and although we can't recognize it, we're moving closer and closer because we've got a big plasma screen and a brand new car. We somehow think that we're wealthier, but wealth is measured by our ability to enjoy the success we have. And if we look around, people have less and less time. They have less and less time to relate to each other and spend with each other. And so I'd say we're actually sliding into a type of poverty. A living return is something that I just recently mentioned, which is if we cycle our energy in our community, it amplifies, and it's a way of creating wealth for each and every one of us. So cooperative action and resource pooling creates economy of scale and scope and nurtures interdependence, which is where we want to be if we're not to be affected by all the swings and changes that are coming. And of course our measure of success is our ability to enjoy this abundance. I'm going to use a quick example of a plant like bamboo, which was used in the East because it became analogous to a person in terms of what the best qualities of people could have. And it balanced strength and flexibility. It was hollow, much like the idea of spirit, emptiness. And on the back of bamboo, the whole of Southeast Asia was built. What we see as the economies of India and China and Vietnam, they were all built on bamboo because bamboo is the fastest growing plant on earth. It can produce more biomass 7 times faster than a pine forest. We can use it to eat, build our houses, build bridges, as firewood, for fuel. This is one of the examples I was talking about earlier of recognizing where the source of bioenergy is and what is our most useful access to it. And I'm not going to go too much more into bamboo other than bamboo is one of the master plants that can actually make the transition from where we're at right now to a type of utopian ideal with the maximum amount of grace and the least amount of karmic repercussions for where we're going. Okay, so the question then becomes, when do we become tools of nature? When do we assume our true roles of guardians on earth and stop using nature as a tool? So to this end, I had a look at Byron Shire did a study to have a look at where we are. So we're moving, as I mentioned earlier, from a depleting survival-based culture where people were getting timber and whales and farming and depleting the soil, towards a nourishing and abundant creative culture. Now, a creative culture is obviously nourishing, abundant, wealth-creating, community unifying, balancing, and healing and inspiring. So what is the path to nurture a creative cultural dynamic? So the first part, which is for our community in Byron Shire, was we need to identify the unique community assets. These are some of them. Natural beauty. We're an alternative healing centre. We have a fantastic creative talent pool. I think we've got the highest amount of creative industries per capita in this area, in Australia. Of course, we have deep spiritual wisdom. The name of this place, before it was Byron Bay, thank you, was Cavern Bar, which was a Bundjalung word. That was meeting place, and this still is a meeting place, an incredible hot pot and melting pot of amazing cultures and people. We've got an inspiring cultural history, of course, and attractive ecotourism. So how do we take all those unique assets and how do we make them work for us as a community so that we don't feel like we're being marginalised and eventually forced to move out of this community? So we embody our strengths in our town and community. We need more public art. I mean, when you come into Byron, you look around, there's a lot of pubs and surf shops, but, you know, we could do with some public art, some huge sculptures. More busking in the streets, please. Of course, the landscape, with the amount of incredible gardeners and what people talk about in this place, it's shocking to think that you drive from the highway into Byron Bay along a road that has pastures and an electrical company, a cement works, chicken works. You know, it should just be landscaped. It should be beautiful landscape from the highway into this town here. Of course, the architecture, I probably don't need to mention much, but there's some incredible architecture, organic architecture around the world that would be great if we had some here. We invested obviously in the people and in the place itself. So, if we are not above a certain threshold, when some of these changes, these big changes arise, be it climate change or peak oil or depleted uranium or a third world war, or maybe all or none of the above, if we're not above a certain threshold, what happens is we have division, competition and violence. Most people probably will remember Katrina. When the deluge arrived, people grabbed guns and it was survival. Everyone was, it was dog eat dog. And there are other really good examples of when the chips are down, people can get together and it forms cohesion, opportunity and abundance. People pool their wealth, they pool their wisdom, they share their tractors, they carpool to, you know, their places of work. But we don't need to wait for some sort of disaster in order to start really implementing these things. We can do this on a local level right now. So this slide, the honeypot and the start of competition, is basically about the concentration of bioenergy in the environment. If you are a bee and you belong to a beehive would be a rich source of honey in a veritable desert of bioenergy. And of course, as soon as you have such a rich source of bioenergy, you have to develop a community with stings just to protect yourself. And this is what happens when we pool bioenergy too much in the environment. If you have an empire like a British Empire going around the world and conquering and ruling and bringing back vast resources to its shores. Very soon it becomes such a desired place that you have half the people in the world wanting to migrate there because they think there's great wealth. And so England, along with many other countries like America, become places where large people flock to try and find some sort of riches and wealth, and often it's pretty hollow. So how do we distribute this bioenergy? And like I mentioned before, we track what the source of bioenergy is, and of course the sun is the source of bioenergy, and plants are the true alchemists because they're the only beings that can make physical form from light, and they're turning that sunlight into food in the form of fruit and other things, crops, medicine, housing and building materials, firewood. So we're literally swimming in a sea of energy. We just need to know how to access this energy. And of course, learning how to share. Now, this community is already relatively well versed in learning how to share. But when we start to see the creative communities rise, and we look back at creative communities in the past, when they reach past the survival mode, past fighting over food and resources, they step into a new realm. And the peak of creative culture is actually building a temple. Now, a temple is a creative project that has a shared vision from a whole community. Now, a modern day temple could be a feature film, it can be a music album, it can be an architectural project, it can be an Eiffel Tower. But what it is the united creative energy of a community. And this stems to anchor so much bioenergy in that place that it can take thousands of years to dissipate. Just look at, for example, Angkor Wat in Cambodia. There are millions of people going each day and pouring money into Cambodia. It's Cambodia's largest single source of wealth is just the energy that was set up when people shared a vision and built the most incredible building they could build as a homage to the earth and spirit. So I hope to see Byron in the future Byron Shah as a temple garden state, which is a whole bunch of gardens all linked together, much like Kyoto, where people will come and share in the gardens, and set within those gardens are the most incredible cultural facilities, healing temples, sound temples, places where we can grow and eat healthy food, where we can hang out with each other and sing and dance, make art. So this again is Bill McDonough, and he says our goal is a delightfully diverse, safe, healthy and just world with clean air, water, soil and power, economically, equitably, ecologically and elegantly enjoyed. So this is the end of this part of the talk. And so the question is utopia attainable? And the answer is surely there's no way attainable. Utopia is not attainable. Utopia already exists here and now, and it's for us to discover it. It's a shift in perception, it's a shift in belief system, and it, along with that belief system, grows a garden, and it's a mind garden. And so survival of the fittest will evolve to survival and thriving of the most loving. Now I'm going to take a 1-minute break and continue. Okay, so the next part is dream seeds and nurturing the mind garden. So of course a seed is a portal into infinity. With one seed you can plant a whole forest. With one seed it opens into 1,000 plants with 1,000 seeds. And so a seed is like infinity. 1 equals infinity. And so what I'm going to suggest tonight is that we plant some mind seeds, because all true change is individual change. All true change is on a local level. All true change changes and exists within the human body and the individual itself. And if we change ourselves and we change our belief systems, the world changes with us. So who is the Messiah? The Anointed One? Of course it's us. Each one is our own Messiah. And if we wait for the Messiah, we may be waiting a long time. So I'm going to briefly discuss Steiner's cosmology, which is very interesting. Steiner had this idea that humans were the first beings to come to Earth, but the last beings to take physical form. Out of human being unfolded the mineral kingdoms, the plant kingdoms, and of course all the nature kingdoms. And when the planet itself was like a Garden of Eden, human took form in the form that I'm standing in right now, and the form that you're all sitting in. And so we're going to discover a new language of light. And this language is being taught to us by stealth. This is the reverse of the Tower of Babel. This is how we start to all communicate. Initially, we think this communication is maybe New Age or etheric, but how many of us have a computer? How many of us have a mobile phone? That's silicon. Those silicon chips form a crystalline grid, an artificial crystalline grid that conducts consciousness, which can be described like light. And as we start to work more on our computers, we realize that we're being taught a language by stealth. If someone says to you, desktop, you know what a desktop is. And if I said to you, your desktop was like the mind, and your operating system was the way in which you operate in the world. And if you need to download some new software, you'd probably understand what I mean in a computer term. But when you relate that to humans, we see that we're constructing technology in the way in which we understand consciousness. And so then things like software become different ways in which we can see the world and solve problems. And I'm not going to go into this too much because it's a long rave, but that's probably enough of a taster. As I mentioned before, plants are the true alchemists. And humans, in conjunction with plants, form a sacred cross. Plants are drawing down cosmic energy in the form of light, starlight and sunlight each day, and drawing them down into the earth. They're drawing earth energy up into the tree. Where this earth energy and cosmic energy mix, they then produce, as I said, fruits, medicines, firewood. Humans consume these gifts of the union of heaven and earth, and what their role seems to me to be is to spread it in this dimension. So trees are an axis in this dimension, and humans are an axis in this dimension. We're eating those fruits. We're using the medicines to heal, and what that does is it gives us a quality of life. And with that energy, we travel over the earth, and we sing and we dance and we tell those stories and we dream a new existence. And so together, the humanity and plants form a sacred cross. And Joseph Campbell talked about the hero's journey, which is how we each person has to go through their own healing journey, their own medicine journey, their own journey of creativity, where they're drawing down energy from a vibration which is beyond words. And so this vibration has color, it has shape, it has sound. But before we can define it into words, we can dance it, we can sing it, we can dream it, and of course, it's loving. So bringing back the treasures and the essence of I, all spiritual journeys then are no longer journeys that we go outward, but they're inward journeys. And so our relationship to ourselves becomes all important, because if we have a good relationship with ourselves and we're loving, that means we can love other people. So when we journey to these differing dimensions, we have the opportunity to bring back all sorts of things. We can go to London, for example, and bring back a T-shirt that says, you know, I went to London and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. But we can also be aware of what the seeds and tools are in our environment as we travel and bring them back. And then we'll become the sacred nectar gatherers, because, of course, it's seeds and tools which is going to enrich our lives on a day-to-day level. So, where is the center of human consciousness? How many people here think they're endemic? How many people here, you know, believe that they're indigenous? Of course, everyone's indigenous. And so, when some of our recent ancestors thought that the earth was flat, and they thought that the sun revolved around the earth, after a while people had a look and said, well, hold on a moment, I think the earth is revolving around the sun. And so we shifted from geocentricity and egocentricity into heliocentricity, where the sun was the center of our consciousness. And then very soon after that we found out that the sun was actually going around the center of a galaxy, and we became galactic conscious and galactic centric, and very soon after that we realized our galaxy was one of billions of galaxies, possibly expanding from or revolving around a central point unbeknownst to us that we could maybe just point to. And where will this lead? Well, I can tell you where I think it leads. I think it comes back to the idea that the center of the universe is you. In your heart, in a lotus-shaped temple, exist all the mountains, the stars and the planets, the oceans. So that's paraphrasing from the Chogyam Upanishad. So planting the seeds of spherical consciousness. This is the realm of what we're dealing with now, where we're looking at things like global climate change, and we're trying to work out how to stop it. I feel this is one of the most dangerous parts in human history. I think it's akin to coming into a room where a woman is giving birth and not knowing what we're doing with the pain and the blood. We try and stop this process. I think all our energy may go trying to stop a totally natural process, which is actually a birth of consciousness. It's the flowering of human consciousness that's occurring, and we see it as too much carbon. Well, I can tell you from my perspective as a gardener, if I wanted to grow more plants quicker, I'd want it warmer and more carbon dioxide. And I'd say it's the Earth's natural response to deforestation. It's the Earth's natural response to producing more for now, because when we look carefully, we'll see that the changes of global climate change are occurring on every planet in our solar system. And so global climate change is reflecting a shift in consciousness. And so instead of going against it, we should move with it. And it reminds me of a story of a Brahmanic saint who is doing his meditations up in a cave, and he came down and his house was on fire, and the neighbours were running backwards and forwards from the river with buckets of water, and they'd saved some of his furniture from his house and pulled it aside, and he just walked up and picked up a piece of furniture and put it on the fire. And the neighbours were, a bit bewildered, but didn't want to stop. They kept on running backwards and forwards with buckets to the river, and very soon a big rain cloud gathered, and it started to rain, at which stage the villagers all put their buckets down, because the rain was going to put the fire out. And this was the time that the Brahmin picked up his bucket and ran to the river and grabbed bucketfuls of water and came back and threw it on the house. And of course, after the fire was out, the villagers said to him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm following spirit." So there's some things that I'd like to just put your attention towards, because we don't really have time to cover tonight. One of the things is the primacy of DNA. It's an author called Bruce Lipton who's written an incredible book called The Biology of Belief, which basically says that our genetics is reprogrammable instantly. And so we are not victim to how we were born, but we can create our own bodies built out of what we believe. And he has scientific examples of this. One being, for example, they did an experiment with some mice. Poor mice, they always end up at the butt of an experiment. So, when the mother and father mouse were under stress, the ovum and the sperm that was chosen by the body of those mothers selected for young mice that were more powerful and more robustly built at the expense of intelligence. Contrasting that was mice, mother and parent mice that were in a really relaxed and chilled out environment, and they produced young mice with brains and intelligence almost double of the brawny mice. And so that gives you an idea of how we think, how we act, how we behave determines not only how our own genetics is constantly shifting, but the genetics of the people who are coming after us. And it's our responsibility to take that into account when we have the future generation. So that's Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. And I'll briefly talk about a couple of other things. The hot expanding electric earth is reference to the sun itself. We've been told the sun is like a vast ball of exploding gases of burning hydrogen, and that the relationship between the sun and the earth is the sun is heating the earth and sending all the energy to the earth, and the earth basically basks in the sun, and all the plants produce all this incredible stuff for us. But I have a suggestion that there's actually a return flow of energy, and the more people are loving on this earth, the more the sun will shift. Now, it's been predicted by the Maya and by NASA and by many other people in the scientific world that by 2012, which happens to be an interesting portal year for the Maya, that NASA predicts that the sun is going to be 50% more active than it was in the last solar cycle. And the last solar cycle at solar minimum was more potent than solar maximum. So we're in for some interesting times, because I believe that the activity of the sun is reflecting the activity of human consciousness. And so the sun heats the earth in the same way that when your lover walks across the room and you blush, you're heating in resonance and relationship to your lover. She's not necessarily glowing and radiating that heat, which explains a lot of why the dynamic relationship between the sun and the earth is the way it is. Also, that the earth, all water on earth, there's an idea that all water on earth comes from off-planet. And because all living systems employ water as part of the living dynamic, it's an interesting idea. Now, if you look at what I was taught, for example, as a kid, was that there was Pangaea and Gondwana land, and these were supercontinents. And so I was shown how all the continents joined in a massive ocean. The problem is the edge of this continent on this side and the edge of this continent on this side actually also joined. And there's only one way they could actually join, and that is if the Earth was only 40% of its size. And so there's a time that Earth was just 40% of its size and didn't have water. And so as it expands, all the continents moved apart. And NASA reckons that there's between 10 and 70,000 tons of water arriving on Earth each day. And so that's food for thought. And it relates to how we perceive consciousness. of course this too is a dream. So Mind Prophecy talks about the perfect storm, which is the mind storm, of course. And in times of a perfect storm, we can all stand on the ship and have different responses. If a storm is coming towards the boat, some can, hold up talismans and try scare off the storm. Yet others may start blaming everyone else for sailing us in this course to reach the storm. But the only true response is to ready the ship, batten the hatches, and create a resilient community, which is what the first part of the talk was about. And of course, the only true way is ready the ship, and the ship is relationship. And this is the relationship between us and ourselves. So, the body temple is built on the idea of us loving ourselves. And I'm going to quickly go through some slides about loving ourselves. Of course, we're all searching for the same thing, which is love. And this becomes our primary drive. This is the seed source. Each one of us, if we start to look back and we see all the things we do, whether it's making money or becoming powerful or owning things, often is initiated by our idea that if we're more wealthy, people will love us. If we look more beautiful, people will love us. If we're thinner, if we drive a faster car. But essentially, we all want the same thing, and that's love and appreciation. And so if we focus on love and appreciating ourselves, we realize that then we cut off from the need to get it from others, which frees us up to truly relate to others and share it. And so there's a saying from the Talmud which said, we don't see the world the way it is, we see it the way we are. This incredible mirror-like reflection of what we call reality is mirroring who we are. For all those things out there that we look at and we don't like, they just reflect aspects of ourselves that we don't know about and we haven't learned to love yet and appreciate. And when we do, those things will disappear and all we will see is beauty. So this is a story about the monkey pilot and the golden avatar. Who do we identify with? Now, the monkey pilot is a story of cellular evolution over millions of years, evolving as it evolves through all sorts of life forms to a monkey which is self-reflective and eventually self-realized. And so it's a physical being having a spiritual experience. The golden avatar, of course, is the idea that we are spirit and we've zipped on this suit of flesh and bones to walk on this earth. And so that, from that perspective, we're a spiritual being having a physical experience. Now, whichever one we most identify will determine how we relate to life. Because if we're a monkey having a spiritual experience and someone tries to take away our food and our shelter and our love, we'll feel threatened and, of course, want to fight them for it. And this is where survival of the fittest and the idea of survival of the fittest comes from. If we balance our identification by realizing that the body is a superconscious being evolved over billions of years, and that the spirit is inhabiting the body, also an all-knowing, omnipotent, omniscient being, then from that perspective, it enables us to enjoy life on a whole different level, because we don't have a need for anything. We don't even have a need for oxygen, because from that perspective, if I stop breathing, I may lose my monkey suit, but I can never die. So the need becomes the seed of all habitual behavior. And of course, habitual behavior is the single thing that most people, even on spiritual paths, stumble upon. And this is where we get into the realms of addiction and desire, where we come into the realms of a new understanding of what karma is. So, of course, this is a description of the monkey pilot. These are some of the things the monkey pilot needs in order to exist. And I was shown on a particular journey when I was in the Amazon a spectrum of emotion. And what it basically showed me was that when we have a high vibration, when we are happy, what we see out there in the world seems like a heavenly realm and is beautiful. And then as we start to become moved to joy and mild depression, things seem to be bland. And as we go into deeper depression and ultimately into paranoia, not only are things bland, but everyone's out to get you, everything's poisonous. Now, nothing has changed except our idea of what has changed. And so it's our responsibility to maintain as high an emotional awareness and happiness as possible to walk in this attainable utopia. So it no longer becomes what we do out there, but our attitude to who we are. And so the heaven and hell realms are not necessarily realms that we may reach when we die. They are realms that we inhabit today. And it doesn't matter if you live in paradise, if you're not happy, it can be hell. Just like if you take a veritable seeming hell realm like a city and you happen to be able to be happy in that, then that can be heavenly. So the body then is a multi-track recording and playback system. Indigenous people from around the world would put ochre on their body. And the reason to put ochre on your body is ochre is just rusted iron. And when people used to make music with recorded tape, what tape is a piece of cellophane with rust on it. And as it goes over your magnetic recording head, the magnetic recording head aligns those pieces of rust into a particular formation, and so the musical vibration is recorded on that rust. And then when it goes to the playback head, the alignment of those rust particles plays music. So now, it just so happens that the center of the hemoglobin of blood is iron. And the shape of an iron is like a donut, which happens to be the shape that the most compressible information is most compressible into. And so when you take these two things together and you have this blood coursing through your body, and what we're swimming in is this sea of electromagnetic bioenergy, these signals, then the body becomes an antenna, much like a television antenna. As you tune it in, you get a signal, and that signal then becomes what it is that's displayed on the surface. And so imagine we walk as an Aboriginal man along a song line. What we're doing is we're picking up the vibration of the earth, we're picking up the song of the earth, and we're recording it into our blood. And each organ acts as a record and playback head for different types of energy. For example, our liver may be for recording how much anger we have and then playing that back into the environment. Our heart may record how much compassion, our kidneys, how much fear. And so each of who we are is recorded, played into our blood, extracted into urine, and then peed into the environment, into water. But it's also what we think. So it's not only coming out here, it's coming out of our mouths, it's coming out of our thoughts, it's coming out of our dreams. So each person is affecting every other being, every other living being with their music. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we go to the next program, which is going to be a movie about music and culture. Okay, so to reprogram, we need to practice. If we find that what we're doing is not working, and we realize there's a higher ideal and we want to move in that direction, then the way to do it is to practice. And I'm sure most of you remember the Karate Kid. It was, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. What his teacher was teaching him is to repetitively do something again and again until it became second nature. And then when he was in a fight and his opponent took a punch at him, he naturally blocked. And so when the practice becomes second nature, you no longer need to think about what it is you're doing, because it is your second nature. And in order to scrub the old programs that do not serve us and create the new ones, we need to realize that the new ones need to be created, and then we need to practice until they become second nature. And so then we arrive at the most advanced piece of technology ever created. And that, of course, is the human body. The human body, to us, if we take all of our technology and we draw it into the future, our mobile phones, our travel, cars, and we actually converge that technology into a piece of bio-wetware, we realize that when we have the right instruction manual, we will be able to be telepathic. We'll be able to bilocate. All of these that are seemingly unattainable city powers are the realm of the human body when it's activated and knows what to do. And so I encourage everyone to be open, because as we move towards the next few years, the opportunity to practice these things is going to be easier and easier. So this is the big initiation, and moving towards the blissful jewel within, which of course is our birthright and our true nature. And so from that, the solution to all problems is to cultivate self-love. And this doesn't matter if it's political, it doesn't matter if it's social, global, environmental. There's only one true response: cultivate self-love. So realize this: the self is ever evolving, never changing. The self is everything and nothing at the same time. There's no path that does not lead to the divine. When you cultivate self-love, we realize the self may start here, but it expands outwards in ever greater circles to encompass everything. So you are God, and so is everyone and everything else. Life is happening for you, not to you. Each moment is our most potent moment for self-realization. Here are some tools. Don't take it personally. Don't take it seriously. Don't worry, be happy. Gratitude. Gratitude is the blade that slays expectation. Resistance is persistence, and acceptance initiates change. And this is counterintuitive. What we were taught as kids was, if you don't like something, change it. And the best way of changing something is accepting it, not being emotionally attached. This has been one of the most potent guiding forces in my life. And there was a small kid who came up to someone who was giving a lecture on indigo children. And this man gave a lecture for, I think, an hour and a half, and there was a 4 or 5 year old kid in the front row sitting attentively through the whole lecture. And at the end of the lecture, the young child approached the man, and the man said, "Wow, that was kind of amazing, you sitting there and being so attentive and not fidgeting for that whole talk, and it was really quite adult based." And the child said to him, there's only one thing you have to do, and that is pretend realization. And that took him back, and the kid walked off. And later he asked people about this kid. Did anyone know who the kid belonged to? And no one saw the kid. He was the only person who actually saw that child. And so I think it's a very interesting idea to dwell on, pretend realization. What would you do if you were a self-realized being? So the final frontier becomes the mind. And when I say the mind, I'm not talking about the brain, I'm talking the big mind. This is the mind that Buddhists refer to. So almost at the end is the transmission of beauty. I had an interesting experience where I went to the dentist for some oral hygiene, and it was quite painful, so I requested some nitrous oxide, some gas, and it was still painful, so she turned the gas up. And at a certain time, something really strange happened. The dentist was no longer drilling my teeth. It was me drilling my teeth as the dentist. I was the nurse, I was the light, I was the whole room. And I was taken to an interesting place where a being who I recognized as a sort of version of myself, maybe older and wiser, gave me the transmission of beauty. And the transmission of beauty is really quite simple. How it goes is, if we see anything outside of ourselves that is beautiful, and I'm going to use an example like a lotus flower, and we go, wow, that's beautiful. What happens is the energy rises in our body and comes out through our eyes and is absorbed by this living being, let's say this lotus. And that lotus can feel that love and appreciation that comes out of us, and it grows more beautiful. And so the energy cycles back and forward and back and forward, and this is healing to the human being on all levels. If, on the other hand, we see something in the world that we think is ugly, it can be war, it can be anything that we find abhorrent. What that is reflecting is an aspect of ourselves that we have not learned to love and appreciate yet, that we see reflected out there. Much like Jung was saying, if someone is walking down the road that you don't like, be it a Muslim or a black man, how could you hate that person? You've never met them. What you hate is an aspect of yourself that they reflect to you. And so the transmission of beauty is the understanding that when all we see is beauty, we know that we have reached a place of pure healing, a place of loving ourselves. And I did quote to you that Chogyam Upanishad earlier about the center of the universe being our heart. But if you can read what that rock says, it says, undoubtedly the universe is unfolding as it should. And so I've got a couple of things to Google if you'd like, and I will be putting this talk up on YouTube if anyone missed information and wants to catch up, and as well as some other notes that go with it that expand it. And of course, if you had to read that, you may read it as God is now here or God is nowhere. And the difference may be just a teeny little space, but ultimately there are two sides of the same coin. And so that concludes this talk. And if there's any questions, fire away.